But now we are very excited to welcome back our friends from Porchlight. If you don't know Carla and Kim, you should get to know them. Obviously, that's going to have to be through Zoom right now, but they are two just amazing champions in our city for people that don't normally have a champion. And they're just outstanding to work with. And we wanted them here today to give an update on the men's shelter process. As you know, as Officer Kalka just mentioned, the men's shelter has been temporarily moved to Warner Park. Just how that process is going for Porchlight and their partners at the Beacon, but also what does the future potentially look like for the shelter. And so you have got the two best people, Kim and Carla, to answer those questions. So they're going to give a little update, and then we really want this to be a discussion. So please think of your questions for them when they're done. So you guys are up. Kim, Carla, welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I told Kim that this was her 20 minutes because she supervises the supervisor of the shelter, so I will just jump in as needed. But Kim, tell them about this whole process of what's happening.
Sure. So I'm not sure what the baseline level of knowledge is about the process so far. So I'll be brief with an overview, and then we can ask a bunch of questions. So previously we had been at Grace Church as well as two overflow churches, St. John's and First United Methodist, to make a 3-shelter system. And we have been doing that for 35 years, and it was something that we had already been talking about making a change to, so looking for a larger space in order to build a purpose-built shelter that would be more humane and serve our purposes better. We were crunching into church basements and so appreciate the generosity of those churches, but knew that that was not a humane solution moving forward, and that we really needed to look into doing a larger space. And so last year we had started with Grace Church, a shelter steering committee that included a lot of community stakeholders as well as folks from the city and county and the other shelters in town. So that shelter steering committee had been meeting several times last year and early this year to talk about what might a purpose-built shelter for men in our community look like. And we had worked on kind of an idea of what that might look like prior to COVID. When COVID came around, that process sped up rapidly because we knew from the beginning that there was no capability in our current space at Grace Church and our overflow churches to promote physical distancing. There was no point from the front door to the way out where people could be 6 feet away from each other, and that was our main concern. There was no way to mitigate those dangers of COVID in our current space. So it accelerated what we already knew was true, is that we needed to get a new space. And so our response to COVID has been threefold. One, as Officer Kalka had mentioned, is to identify and move folks who are especially vulnerable into hotels in the community. So folks who are over the age of 65 or have underlying health conditions that would make them particularly susceptible to a bad reaction to COVID. We've moved a couple hundred, I think, people into hotels to pull them out of the various shelter and unsheltered situations around town, so that we have that solution going. So a lot of folks are isolated at hotels with some minimal case management, and then there's also a move to work with those folks to move them into housing versus putting them back on the streets once COVID has passed. So that was one. Another is to identify folks at the front of shelter, doing health assessments, and if folks are presenting with symptoms at the front end of shelter, not allowing them into shelter and instead diverting them to medical respite center. So that was originally run by Salvation Army and has been taken over by the city, but we have been working with Nurse Disrupted LLC, which is a bunch of nurse volunteers who are able to do virtual assessments, in addition to a bunch of volunteers from the community who are willing to do initial screenings. So we've got a group of folks coming to ask everybody, and our protocol has changed 6 times since the beginning of COVID due to all of the new information that we've received. But right now there's a list of 11 symptoms that we're asking everybody when they come to the shelter every day. So do you have any of these 11 symptoms? If they acknowledge that they have any of those symptoms, they're diverted to a trailer that we have on site at Warner Park to undergo a larger assessment by one of those nurse volunteers. And at that point, the nurse volunteer makes the decision, are these COVID-related symptoms? If not, they may be deemed to be safe to go into shelter. If they appear to be COVID symptoms, they will send them to a medical respite center which is staffed by focused counseling and public health nurses where they are tested for COVID, and they have to receive 2 negative tests to be medically cleared to return to shelter. Or if they're having a medical emergency, obviously they would be sent to the hospital. So that's another piece of the solution. And then of course, moving out to Warner Park. So we, as I said early on, realized that there's no way to physical distance at any point in the shelter. And so in order to promote those solutions, we needed to find a new space, a much larger space where we could consolidate our staff and keep everybody in the same space. Warner Park was the most obvious solution of the ones that the city was looking at. We're able to fit about 100 people in 90 to 100 people in the large gym at the Warner Park Recreation Center. And then there's additionally a smaller kind of conference room that we've been using as an isolation room for folks who are particularly intoxicated or experiencing a mental health crisis. And then we have a larger space down the hall that we could use if the numbers started to go up. Because at the beginning, we weren't sure how long folks were going to be able to stay in hotels. Right now, we're at, we have a little bit of room to expand before the space would then become too small again. So since we moved out to Warner Park, that was March 30th, I think, if I remember correctly, we have consolidated our staff out there. We serve about anywhere from 60 to 110 has been the range out at Warner Park, but we settle in the 70s and 80s typically of people per night. While we've been out there, we have suspended our enforcement of the 90-day limit. So typically folks have 90 days in a year that they can access shelter, and we have just put a hold on that during COVID. So anyone can access shelter even if they would otherwise be out of days. We have also tried a few new policies, such as allowing folks in when they're intoxicated over the legal limit, which previously we had not been able to do at the earlier sites that we had been at. And so we've been having quite a few people who are intoxicated, even highly intoxicated, out at shelter, and we've been able to serve those folks successfully for the most part. We, as Jason had mentioned, also have a partnership with the Beacon that is temporary but has been super helpful. They have provided us with a couple of staff people to ease that transition during the waking hours from 5 to 9. They've taken the lead a little bit in organizing volunteers for the health assessments, and then they also work with a lot of the clients who are experiencing mental health symptoms or intox, so that we have enough staff to go around. Previously, we had one person at each shelter manning the mass of people being served there. So this has been an experiment for us, being able to have staffing levels that are appropriate, and what else we're able to do when we can do that. So we have loved our time out at Warner Park. We obviously have, we always have incidents that occur at shelter, but as Officer Kalko mentioned, we've kept it pretty much under control. We haven't had major incidents. We've kept a really open relationship with the Northside Police Department and the alders on the north side, and we've kept that relationship really strong. And so we don't know at this point what our end date is at Warner Park. Certainly there was some inquiries from the neighborhood about when the center would become available again, prior to, I guess, this new kind of deepening of the first wave. So I don't know whether those inquiries still stand Originally, they had thought perhaps until the end of summer, but I have not heard anything new about that. Additionally, the city has realized that, both the city and county have realized that it's not tenable for us to return to Grace Church and our other overflow sites, as this COVID pandemic is not about to end anytime soon. We found not only that we can't return during this pandemic, but also any future situations like this, we'd be in the exact same spot. So I think they already knew this to be true. That's why we set up the shelter steering committee, and now this has just exacerbated that need. And they are looking for potential new spaces for us. Last I heard, they had a handful of sites that they were considering, but we have not heard what those sites are or any indication of when we or any other service provider might be brought into that process of selection. Or we also anticipate there would be an RFP for operational services at some point, but we have not heard any news about that of late either. So kind of don't know some of the pertinent information, but we do know that we need to move in a new and thoughtful direction. So that's my update.
I just wanted to add two quick things and then have you talk about one more thing, and then we can certainly take questions. Part of the health screening process is the temperatures. We have the forehead non-touch thermometers, so that's also part of the process. We take temperatures on it, everybody. So in addition to people saying yes to symptoms or exhibiting symptoms, if someone has a high enough temperature, they also get diverted to the trailer. And then masks. We require, strongly encourage everybody to wear masks. We got, a couple weeks ago, we got 12,000 masks from Hanes brand underwear. Instead of making t-shirts, they turned the t-shirts into masks. So we will be good out at the shelter for a while, which is wonderful. Kim, can you talk a little bit about the mass testing that's coming up?
Yes. So yes, as Carla mentioned, we have been requiring cloth masks for participation at shelter for over a month now, which is frankly good because there's a new public health announcement coming out Monday that everybody should be wearing cloth masks anytime they're in a public space, and that would obviously apply to us as well. So we don't have to make adjustments. Thankfully, we are already doing that, and we have been providing those cloth masks for everybody. So that's been good. Mass testing. So we have been interested for a while in bringing mass testing from public health out to the shelter. Obviously, our folks have mobility issues getting out to Alliant Energy Center, but also there have been super long lines, and we wanted to figure out how to increase access to our population, specifically focused on folks who are either not presenting with symptoms or not reporting symptoms, who may be asymptomatic and accessing shelter. So it's not meant to duplicate the health assessment screening and the work of the medical respite center, but rather to get at testing a bunch of folks who are reporting being asymptomatic and seeing if we can stop the asymptomatic spread amongst folks experiencing homelessness. So I met with Unity Point Health Meritor and public health staff last week to take a tour of the Warner Park space and talk about how a mass testing may work. They seemed very positive about being able to do an initial round the first week of August. We've not heard an update yet on that, but I know they're actively working toward doing that. And the idea would be anyone who is being accepted through the shelter doors, so they would still do the health assessment screening on the front end, and anyone who would screen out to medical respite would still go there because they get tested there, and they would be isolated there. But folks who make it through the initial screening and the temperature check would then be ushered into the mass testing space toward the back of Warner Park, and everyone, including staff, would be able to get a test, give their information to public health, and be individually contacted about their test results in a couple of days. And then if they were tested positive, then they could isolate those folks to medical respite right away and hopefully prevent any further spread. They would hope to then duplicate that every other week, come every 2 weeks to do the mass testing on anyone who presents at shelter and also staff. So we're really looking forward to that and hoping that that all pans out, because that would be great for our folks who may not otherwise have access to testing.
Well, Kim and Carla, thank you for that fantastic presentation. You guys are doing amazing work, and I want to say a thank you to Jonathan Grieser as well for all the amazing work over the years at Grace Shelter, 35 years. Your stewardship of the community is fantastic from all of you. So thank you from everyone at DMI. So we'd love to take a few minutes here to answer anyone's questions. Any questions from the committee? Kathy Bailey.
I have so many questions. First of all, just like you guys, amazing what you like. To be nimble in this environment is challenging, as we all know, but to do what you guys did and pivot in the ways you did, I'm like getting teary-eyed, like seriously, it's amazing, amazing stuff. We, like you, have a shelter, and we, like you, do screenings. I would love to hear your 11 questions, because we've also pivoted on some, but we can sideline on that just to make sure that we're like in sync with everybody else's stuff. On the proposed for a purpose-built shelter, are the city and county going to build a shelter for you? Is that where this is going? And then ask for an RFP for you to provide services at said shelter? Or, I mean, that seems to be a significant shift. And I forgot my third question, sorry.
So yes, at this time, there's not a lot of communication, which a little bit more communication would be nice. It's our understanding that the city is looking for a new space. At this time, I believe they're looking at existing spaces. So that could be another temporary site, or it could be a permanent site. Of course, you kind of have to wonder if there's a perfect permanent site out there. Why weren't we in it 10 years ago? But maybe it didn't exist then. And then that the county would put up an RFP, that it wouldn't just be because the funding of the shelter for 35 years, we have received no city funds for the operation of the shelter. In the last few years, we have written and received some grants from the city to help out with intake and some case management at the shelter. We've received some funds from the county over the years, from the state shelter subsidy grant, but the primary funder of the shelter for 35 years has been people donating to Porchlight, has been contributions to Porchlight in support of the shelter. So obviously we very much would love to run a shelter in a beautiful new space. But there might also be others who would want to run a shelter in a beautiful new space. So the last, Kim and I are on meetings every 2 weeks with the Northside Alders and the Northside Police Captain and the city. And the city mentioned that they have 6 locations, none of which that are downtown, that they are seriously looking at, but they didn't give us any notion as to where those 6 are.
That is awesome. Thank you for that. I remembered my other question, which is, since it's been a shift from literally at the heart of downtown, has that created more challenges and barriers for those folks to get other services, or has that been pretty seamless?
I'll just answer quickly, and then Kim, you can fill in. The shift to Warner Park has gone so fabulous. Preston, who is our manager out there, jokes that they're going to have to evict us because he loves it so much out there. It's just, if you've been out in their beautiful space, it's just so expansive, all on one floor, right? Like I hate to say, we were literally almost carrying people in wheelchairs down in the back alley on literally a door that we slide people across, and I'm not joking if anybody's seen it. So it has truly fit all of our needs. If you would have asked me 8 months ago, could we have a shelter not downtown? I would have said no. It still presents its problems. You know, many of the men at the shelter work, and that's the biggest issue that I see. So right now, Madison Metro picks the men up at the Beacon at 4:45 in multiple buses and takes them out to Warner Park, and then reverses that in the morning at 7:30 and brings them back downtown to the Beacon. So like most people, many of the men's jobs were on hold or jobs were lost. And so, you know, for those first several months, the men's goal was just to get safely to the shelter. You know, so as, you know, jobs are opening back up, you know, a lot of the men work downtown, especially in the hospitality industry. You know, that's like a little bit on hold, but eventually people will have their lives back and jobs, and you know, people then will have to take multiple buses and just regular city buses. And 8:30 is when intake ends at the shelter. And when we were downtown, what we would do is if you were working, you had to, you know, have some proof of that, and you would just call and say, I'm working tonight, save me a bed. And so we'd have people coming in at midnight, 2 in the morning when the bar shift ended or the restaurant closed or whatever. And so being 6 miles away, that will present obvious things of people being able to get out to wherever we will be, and us being able to accept them after work, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Okay, cool. Thank you very much. That is what I sort of suspected, but it's good to hear that Metro has been so flexible too.
That has been, yeah, that has been key. We couldn't have done it without them, you know, and you can only have 15 people on a bus. So it was
Right.
multiple buses, all working together. I mean, eventually I'm sure they're going to want to start charging people on buses again, right? And not carting us out there. But in the meantime, everything we started on day one is still happening. So that's been fabulous.
That's
Lots
awesome.
of partners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Thanks.
Madison Metro has been wonderful in doing these kind of chartered buses for us, but and even if they had not done that, that would have been, bus would have been the primary mode of transportation out to where we are. So they would have seen a pretty major increase in utilization in routes going out to where we were. And as Carla is mentioning, as folks are going back to work, we have seen a bunch of folks leaving earlier than the chartered buses in the morning to catch a city bus down to work. And that did result in a change in one of the Metro routes to increase the number of buses coming that way, to make sure that there wasn't any lapse in access to the neighborhood, community members as well. So they've not only helped us with the charter piece, but have also been really responsive to changes in utilization in the neighborhood.
That is amazing.
And then to your first question about the 11 questions, those are just the CDC symptoms that they're asking, and we ask about each symptom individually. Rather than assuming that folks have them memorized, we require them to say no to every single symptom every single night.
Isn't that fun?
It sure is.
More questions for Kim or Carla. Kathy, I like the old school raising of the hand. It's so much better. Ron, you'll be next. But Kathy, you're up. Ron with the new age raising of the hand.
Okay. I'm curious to know what's happening, if any of you have a sense of what's happening at a community-wide level. So since COVID, are you seeing that there are people who have lost their jobs and lost their housing? Is there an increase in demand? Is it too early to tell? But what's happening with the, some of the people, do you have an increased demand in services, I guess, is what I'm asking. And there's probably several of you that can respond to that.
I'll just answer briefly, and then other people can jump in, or Kim can jump in. There's certainly been, there was a really nice article about unsheltered homeless people, or informative article, Sunday, I think that was in, that really talked about the increased numbers of people out on the streets. And I think it's a mixture of people losing their housing and people, choosing to not be in a shelter with 90 other people, you know, kind of the survivalist more mentality. Porchlight also runs an eviction prevention program, which gives out small gifts of funds to folks, primarily families who are housed in the community, not in Porchlight housing. And those requests over, you know, those first several months of COVID has just skyrocketed, in particular amongst Hispanic families calling who have never called before. Hassan, who's the manager of that program, said that has gone up 200%. And unfortunately, but so we received $12,000 from United Way in additional funds, right, to give out for that program. That was gone in a couple weeks. He just said that the numbers of new people who have never called the program before has skyrocketed. And, you know, there was that 3-month moratorium on evictions. Well, people who have never been in trouble with their housing before, have never not been workers, have never not paid their rent, they didn't want to be 3 months behind, right? So they called immediately. They didn't get their paycheck, and so they were calling for help. And unfortunately, there just wasn't enough funds to meet the demand. And I guess I haven't seen, I don't know if others have, what the eviction, you know, now that landlords can't evict people, I haven't been keeping track of, you know, what those numbers look like of newly people being evicted because of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think one quick update on 2 things. I think it's important to watch what happens when the $600 extra unemployment funds are off at the end of this month. I think, unfortunately, we're going to see a much different situation in August. And then my wife's firm at Legal Action, who does a tremendous amount of eviction legal work, they're hiring significant amount of new attorneys because of the increased caseload as well. So everyone is seeing this at Legal Action at Porchlight. Question is going to be from Ron, and then followed by Officer Kolka.
Sure, thanks. I've got a 2-parter, but first, you know, I want to thank Carla and Kim. Their service and commitment rises to the level of the unimaginable, to quote Hamilton for a moment. So thank you for that. Kim, I wanted to follow up with your reference to humane conditions. Have you been able to kind of determine what you might call the standard for humane conditions? Does that mean that it's the space available for restrooms, for potentially showers, for any ability for food service? What are those conditions that would rise to the level of being more humane than what maybe have been at Grace Church, or maybe what's even available at the Warner Park?
Definitely. So we talked about some of those things when we were making a plan for the shelter steering committee originally, but being out at Warner Park has solidified a lot of the things that we thought would probably be true. One is that out at Warner Park, we have our beds spaced 6 feet apart, and that has really reduced the number of incidents that we've had related to folks just being inside other people's personal bubble, to be quite honest with you. So being able to spread people out is really important. Having spaces that can be really effectively cleaned on a daily basis, definitely more bathrooms and showers. Private showers has been awesome. We'd like people to be able to be in separate spaces from others, especially when they're doing things like showering. That's a big one. Having more spaces to connect with staff, having more staff there to talk to people and engage with folks while they're there. Food has always actually been a strong part of our programs. Out at Grace, we have had an amazing network of volunteers making food for our folks, and we've switched to single serve catering, and I would say probably the men would prefer to go back to the great big meals that they were receiving from the volunteers, to be honest with you. But certainly the space itself is much better. Having access for folks who have physical disabilities has been huge. At this point, we haven't had that many people with physical disabilities out at the new space, because a lot of those folks are also over the age of 65 or have underlying health conditions that would place them into the vulnerable population hotel. So we haven't had as much of that, but the space that we have out there has, you know, automatic doors and flush entrances and things like that, which we did not have at our other spaces. So that's also a big one. I'm trying to think of what I had one other thing in mind, but I can't think of it right now. But yes, there are multiple things about the new space that has been much better. Being able to queue people inside. So part of the COVID assessment is if it's nice enough outside, we will queue them outside so that they aren't coming into shelter while they're being screened. But if it's raining or it's very, very hot outside, like it has been in recent days, we're able to queue the line inside while people are being assessed and sent off to different parts of the shelter, which has been huge. At Grace, as you know, that space at intake was so tight that we could only fit 15 people crammed like sardines in that area. So folks were always waiting outside necessarily, no matter the weather. So that's been a great thing. And actually that was the other thing, was wide open spaces. So we've had multiple incidents out at the shelter that have been able to be de-escalated due to the wide open spaces where we can give people space. Out at our other spaces, we were at capacity a lot of the time. There's no place for folks to remove themselves from a situation. There's no space for staff to walk away or the person to walk away. You're always in a tight corner. So if somebody's having a mental health crisis or tensions are escalated for whatever reason, there's just no place for people to escape to. And we've had multiple incidents where folks have been able to be pulled away from the group or be, you know, surrounded by staff in a large circle so that they feel like they're not being encroached upon, but the situation is being de-escalated. And we've also had that little isolation room for folks who are experiencing symptoms to separate from the large group, and for folks who are super intoxicated, the same, to separate from the group. So all of those things have been really awesome at the new place, and we would certainly be seeking to reproduce those in a newer space.
So my quick follow-up then would be to use a term that architects might use. Have you been able to take that kind of learning and those amenities and develop a space program, a template type of space program that whoever is shopping for new space might know what the spatial requirements are going to be for new space?
So we gave them the kind of plan that we had made previous to COVID, and then we also amended it with the things that we have found to be true in the new space. So we've not been involved in this initial part of seeking out spaces, but we did let the engineers and real estate folks who are looking from the city what kind of space we're looking for. And something that's been cool out at Warner Park, having city engineers involved, is they were able to, you know, look at a blueprint and say, this is how many cots will fit in this room if they're spaced this far apart, which seems, you know, obvious, but to us, we're, you know, that's just not our strength necessarily. So there are a lot of things that we've been able to operationalize in this new space that we maybe wouldn't have been able to do on our own just by having different kinds of folks at the table.
Great, thank you.
Well, I just want to make a comment about Kim. Kim is a force, and I'm just so glad that she's in our community, but here today, because her and her team did an amazing job with this document in the Homeless Shelter Committee, and really they've seen much of what they recommended really in reality is needed, and it's been fantastic, the dedication that Kim has put into it. So I'm really just excited to see Kim here today and have all of you guys meet Kim, because she's just this amazing leader in our community. So next up we have Craig Kalka, and then after Craig is Peggy Gunderson, and then Jonathan.
All right, I will try to be quick. First, a shout out to Kim and Carla and the folks at the Beacon for the work that happened in a few short weeks to get all this going, and it's been sustainable for now. It's provided great opportunity for a lot of those vulnerable folks in our society, and we see that daily. The question I kind of two-part, but it's based around the 90-day, and I know that Kim had mentioned at this point that has been laxed. Are the days in which they're currently in the shelter still, will they accumulate their 90 days? However, if they get to them, they can exceed those at this point. And then if things kind of change going into the fall, will those folks be out of their 90 days?
Good question. So we mark everybody's days that they stay at shelter on Service Point, which is our homeless management information system, regardless of whether we're actually enforcing the 90-day limit. They're always accumulating days. Normally our shelter year starts November 1st and goes around to October 30th. So folks who are accessing right on November 1st, that's when days start over. We don't hold people accountable for their dates until the end of March. So many people accumulate lots more than 90 in that kind of winter season. But after that, then we start enforcing the 90 days. This year, we were out at Warner Park right at the edge of where we would normally hold people accountable to their days. And we just decided not to do that. So they're still accumulating days according to the process that we were doing before, where we're marking down everybody's days. But if we decided to then start enforcing that again, people's days would have accumulated the same way that they always had, and we would just be reinforcing the rule. I don't anticipate us doing that at all out at Warner Park unless there was a major shift in capacity due to hotels clearing out, but I don't think that that's going to happen. So my guess is that we'll continue not enforcing that 90-day limit for the next several months. Come November 1st, everyone would have a fresh 90 days regardless. But if we were, this is something that we have not been able to do due to previous spaces that we've been using. And if we were set up in the right way, that's something we'd be willing to talk about, but we have to be able to staff a space and have a space that's large enough to accommodate folks who, if there's no limit, to make sure that we can still serve everyone without going over capacity in whatever space that we're in. Does that answer your question?
It sure does. And then just a quick follow-up to that is the hope, I guess, when a new facility, whether it's existing or something built new, would the hope be that there is no 90-day restriction for folks?
That'll have to be a conversation that we have on a community level as well as internally and with the state. So we do receive some funding that indicates that shelter has to be temporary, that caps us at a certain number of days. So there would need to be a conversation to remove that requirement altogether, which I think is possible, but hasn't happened yet. And then we would want to be in concert with the Salvation Army so that we're all making the same decisions, as we try to be pretty in lockstep with them regarding policies and things like that. So that's a conversation we've had in the past and have decided that we were not able to operationally do. And it's something that we're open to, certainly as we're doing it right now, and so is the Salvation Army. But we would need to have that conversation both internally and with the community.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. Peggy, you're up, and then Jonathan, you're up after.
I want to just echo thanks to Kim and Carla for all you do. Your passion for what you do is just really inspiring. So very grateful that we have you both in this community. Obviously, and it's hard to think about it on days like today when it's sweltering heat, but winter and colder temperatures are coming soon. With the new shelter, is that in the back of the mind in terms of time frame to obtain and open, or is that too soon?
I hate to say it, but the answer is we just don't know anything. If we could stay at Warner Park through the winter, we would all be happy, because, the one big gym that we're in, I think it holds like 92, 94 cots. Well, their other room, they have another big, huge room where their weddings are. That would be, that's full of cots too. Like all three of their rooms up there, we set them up with cots. And so if we could stay there, we'd be fine. But I don't think that's going to happen. So yeah, we really just, unfortunately, we don't know anything about the space situation. Hoping to know some stuff soon.
I will say that COVID has taught us that we can make anything happen at any time.
Oh, I do want to say that we are in need of health volunteers to do the health assessments, and you need zero health knowledge. You just need to be able to wear a mask and gloves and ask 11 questions and divert people to a trailer. So Kim can teach anybody that. And so what happened is oddly enough, during those first couple of months of COVID, we had tons of volunteers, lots of young folks, which was awesome. And then they all had to go back to work, right? They had to get back to their lives. And so we pretty much started over. And so we really need more volunteers. And Kim has this cool Google Doc, like you could do once a week or 3 times a month and switch and sign up for what you want. So if anybody in your groups or families who is not in a high risk category wants to volunteer, please reach out to Kim.
Absolutely. And I think that goes without saying that I'm sure Porchlight and Days and all these groups could really use your financial assistance right now. Now more than ever, their resources will go a long way. So if you're able, please spread the word about the great work of Porchlight and the great work of Days, and volunteering and providing financial resources, I'm sure would be very important. I think it's important to give the last word to our Reverend today. So you have the last word, the last question.
All right, thanks, Jason. First of all, Carla, did the guys from medical school contact you?
Doing the people from Medic?
Yeah.
They did, and my answer to them was, do you want to run our health assessment program out at Warner Park?
All right, good.
And she said, I don't know if, because so we had this wonderful Medic program at Grace Church for 25 years or probably more. I remember it when I was an intern there, so 36 years ago, I don't know. Anyway, they couldn't have their students in harm's way, right? In the heart of the shelter with potentially sick people. And so they pulled all of that. And now they're trying to find a way for them to be involved. And she just doesn't know if that's kind of throwing them back into being at risk. But we personally feel that our shelter is about as safe as you can get in this city. I mean, we're all covered from head to toe and screening out every single person who isn't well. And so we're hoping that they get back and say, yes, they would love to be involved with that. That might help our numbers problem.
So let me shift gears a second and say, offer a theological perspective and say that God works in mysterious ways. I've been at Grace since 2009, and I had a rather rocky relationship with Carla's predecessor because of my vocal criticism of conditions in the shelter. And we've been talking at Grace about how we could energize the community towards a new shelter. We've been talking for 5 or 6 years. And of course, in our conversations with the city and county over the years, their answer was, well, until you kick us out, we won't do anything. And so COVID has really, I think, brought home to our politicians and community the fact that the shelter, to use language we've used before here, as it was being operated, and the spaces that it was using at Grace, and was inhumane, inadequate. And I'm grateful for the fact that it's out of there. I mean, there's no air conditioning at Grace, to give you one example. So you know, this is a strange way that this is happening, and I'm grateful to Porchlight and to the city and county for stepping up to find a solution to this this situation that's been a problem. The shelter came to Grace in 1984 on a 1-year temporary basis. And hopefully we'll have a permanent solution that is humane soon. And I look forward to working with everybody, as well as with the other churches, to see that come to fruition.
Well, I think that is the perfect note to end on today. Thank you, Reverend Jonathan, as always, for making sure that our community understands what really is important. Thank you to Carla and to Kim for your amazing work, and to Kathy at Days and the team. And thank you to all of you guys for joining us for this quality of life meeting. We're very thankful for everything that everyone is doing. Hope you can join us again in 2 weeks. We have another important conversation with Linda Ketchum from MUM. That'll be in 2 weeks on the 22nd, again at 8 a.m. Thank you all very much for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Stay healthy, everybody.